My name is Terry Bates of the Cornell Lake Erie Research and Extension Lab. And what we want to do today is give a very simple and easy tutorial on creating a shoot density map for your vineyard. And so what we're doing is we're embarking on a new USDA funded project that we now call the MyEV Small Farms Project. And the main thrust of that project is to develop the MyEV software for growers to use and to start implementing precision viticulture practices on growers' farms. So we're working with Hans Walter Peterson, the viticulture extension specialist in the Finger Lakes region, and Jennifer Russo, the viticulture extension specialist in the Lake Erie region. I'm working with growers to implement this. So for our growers out there, if you're not familiar with the Efficient Vineyard project or how to use the MyEV tool, you can go to efficientvineyard.com. And Nick Gunner of Orbitist, who is our main software developer guru, has developed these MyEV documentation tab in our website. And if you go there, you can see a lot of short tutorial videos on how to create a free account, how to create blocks, how to import data either from your phone or from a sensor, and then be able to process that. So we're going to kind of go through these steps in a very practical application of what we're going to be doing. So the way we're going to do this is I've broken it down into the workflow of how we will do this. So what we're going to do is we have cooperating growers. And we're early May right now, but in mid to late May, when the shoots are 3 to 5 inches in shoot length, we are going to do an NDVI scan of our cooperating vineyard blocks. And so the first thing is to actually create a block and then go out and collect the sensor data. So you start with raw sensor data, which can be very, messy, and it has, data going down the farm roads. And the first thing you need to do is clean and trim that data to a block. And then we interpolate that data. So that's a type of data smoothing. So there's a lot of noise within sensor data. And what we try to do is identify what the underlying pattern is, what we call the spatially structured pattern in that vineyard. And that's what you're going to manage against. So we really want to be able to highlight that. But then the sensor data it is what it is. It is sensor data. And it's not an absolute value of what you might want to measure in the vineyard. So we translate the sensor data with some in-field measurements. So in this case, if we have low, medium, and high NDVI signal coming from our sensor, then we do some shoot counts from some low, medium, and high areas of NDVI signal from that. And we relate the NDVI sensor measurement with validated in-field shoot counts, and we marry those two data sets together to come up with a late May shoot count, which going to look something like this. So in this case, right, so now we have the end product. So I'm going to start at the end and then I'll go to the beginning. So starting at the end is what we really want in the end is a spatial map of shoot count going across our vineyard. And then you can do various things with that in your management. You can identify, I have this very weak or low shoot count area. Could be different reasons why there's low shoot count. The vines could be weak and they need more water and nutrient management. You could have had different pruners in this one section of the vineyard that left fewer retained nodes, which are going to show up as fewer shoot number. This could be a frost pocket in the vineyard where some early season frost has knocked back the shoot number and you're getting that different NDVI signal. So there are things you can do with this management wise, but what we're starting with here is I want a spatial shoot density map of that vineyard, and then I can integrate that in with my management practices for the season. Second thing I want to say about this map, considering starting at the end, is, in this particular example, we're getting a shoot density map of that vineyard. But what I want growers to be thinking about throughout the course of this project is, what are the things you want to measure? Is it differences in soil? Is it differences in vine size or crop size or fruit quality? What are those metrics you want to measure that you find important for your business practice, something that might change the way you manage these vineyards spatially. What's important to you, and how can we go about measuring that in your vineyard? Okay, let's start with step one. So let's start at the beginning, which is having nothing, and so that we can end up with something. So we want to start with a MyEV farm with nothing in it, and we're going to also start with a data set from an NDVI sensor. So whether you drive an NDVI sensor through the vineyard yourself, or you have somebody from our project or a consultant or somebody drive a sensor through the vineyard, they'll give you the raw data file. So what we're going to start with is essentially an empty MyEV map and a spatial sensor data file. And just we're going to start with those two things and move on. So it's important to know that MyEV arranges things in different layers. So you have things organized by farm, and a particular farm is going to have, data and the ability to share with different people. And then you have blocks, and it has the ability to do block level recording. So your farm will have information, your block will have information, and then you have data layers, and they go inside of blocks. And so that's the third level of organization in this software. So let's open up or create a new blank farm. Go to my farm. So I have a bunch of different farms. Of course, I'm a researcher doing things, and I have people sharing farms with me. But we're going to create a new farm, and let's call it, I already have shoot density demo, and we'll just make this number 2. And we're going to save this, and it's going to give me a little pop-up that says you got to choose a location for your vineyard, and you hit OK. And so our vineyard, our farm, in this case, is centered around the Cornell Lake Erie Research and Extension Lab. And I'm going to save that, and it's going to create a new farm for me. So here is my farm, shoot density demo 2, and I am going to put NDVI sensor data on this block, what we call the barn block, because it's next to our barn. So I have to create that block. So within the shoot density demo 2 farm, I create a block. Clicking on the farm, I create the block. Block name, we're going to call this barn block. We're so creative. And I hit submit, and it's going to say, hey, you got to draw the block around there. So you have these little tools on the right-hand side to draw your blocks. I hit this little square tool and go click, click. And there's my barn block. If I want to change the shape of that block a little bit, I can double click on a point and do a little editing if I need to. And if you want to add a point, you can click on this in the middle. Now I have another point that I can move around. So anyways, I'm happy with the way that block looks. It's called barn block, and now I hit submit. I'm going to compile that block. And there it is. Actually looks a little off there, but we're going to go with it for now. So now we have our block. And we want to import spatial data into that block. So what I already have downloaded on my computer is a raw data file that came off of an NDVI sensor. So somebody went through the vineyard, drove through the vineyard, collected this NDVI data onto a data logger, and then this raw data file came from that data logger. And if you look at the raw data file, it looks something like this, a bunch of numbers. But what's important is the headers that are at the top of these numbers, which identify latitude, longitude, the course the person was taking, how fast they were going, the elevation, right? Well, we're interested is NDVI. So we know we have NDVI data in this file, and we want to import that into MyEV and then be able to visualize and map it. Okay, so we come back here in MyEV. I've got my block. I go to my data file drawer where all my data files are going to go when I upload them. I hit upload data set, and we're going to call this shoot density, or no. We're going to call it May NDVI raw data. And we're going to choose a file. We're going to choose the file that we have on our computer. Going to hit open. It's going to process that data. It's looking at all those headers. It's looking at all that data. And there it is. So it's giving you essentially the GPS points that were recorded. And then at each one of these points, there's all that data that is behind it. And we hit submit. Okay, so now in my data drawer, I'm going to have May NDVI raw, which is what I'm looking at here. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to be able to like visualize the NDVI. We want to trim it to the block and get rid of any kind of like excess noisy data that's in there. So, right, we're going to clean the data, clean and trim the data to the block. So one way to visualize it is we do a value based, and remember all those headers that were at the top of that data file. These are those headers that imported right into MyEV, and I'm interested in NDVI, and I'm looking at it and it's like, oh, they're all yellow. So what's going on here? It's because it has a lot of data, erroneous data, and data that was like on the headlands that doesn't mean anything, and it's skewing it. So we add a data filter, and again, we're interested in NDVI. And we look at, and you're like, oh my gosh, all the data is sandwiched down to this one end. And we know that NDVI goes from 0 to 1. So let's just start with saying 0 to 1. That's the values should be in there, and there they are. When we collect sensor data in a field by various methods, we're dealing with a biological system and we're collecting a lot of data. So it tends to fall into a bell-shaped curve, and that usually is, a good thing when it comes to our spatial data processing. And so we can trim this out some more. So stuff that was maybe erroneous data where the sensor was pointing off, pointing out to the barn where there was no vines, or in headlands. So I can move this slider back and forth, and anything that's highlighted in red is going to get trimmed out. So when I start to look at these data points that are in the middle of the field, I'm starting to say, oh, that's probably real data I want to keep. So I don't want to cut too much of that off. And then I'll bring this in from the high end until, again, I start to see stuff that's in the field. And I hit trim data. Okay, so now I'm starting to see, I'm getting some different colors in there. So I'm starting to think, okay, my data set is doing pretty good. Okay, so now I want to trim it to the block, right? So I've trimmed out the junk data, and I want to just snap all the data to the block that I'm in. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the data to a new data set. And we're going to call this May NDVI. We're going to call it, cleaned. Spell it right, cleaned. Okay, I'm going to filter the data before copying it because I've already filtered it, and I want to save all that great work. And then I want to trim it to the block. And when I click that, I get, oh, there's my barn block. So I click on the barn block that's highlighted. So it's only going to save the data I want. And it's going to trim it to the block. And I hit the copy data set. Now I'm going to have a new data set in my data set drawer. Right there, May NDVI cleaned. Right, so now I'm dealing with data that junk data is gone, it's trimmed to the block. And so now the next step is to interpolate the data. And what that is it's taking a lot of the noisiness out of the data and it is predicting or interpolating data to a grid. So we have in MyEV, we have a fishnet grid that overlays all the farms, and it's a 9-foot by 9-foot spacing. And so it's roughly our fishnet is roughly the spacing of our vines, more or less. So we want to interpolate this data. So I want to interpolate May NDVI clean to May NDVI interpolated. It uses an inverse distance weighted interpolation for those of you who are interested in that spatial data statistics. Okay, how do we do this? So we go to the plugins drawer and we hit interpolator to do some interpolation. And that it pulls up and it'll show you what your data sets are. So I have May NDVI cleaned and May NDVI raw to choose from. I want the clean data because, I've gotten rid of a lot of the junk data. And I want to interpolate it for NDVI. Again, that's what we're interested in. And we hit interpolate. And we wait to do this. Now, the bigger the data sets, the more time it's going to take to do the interpolation. I'm going to add that data set to MyEV. I have to get my face out of the way so I can go back to my data drawer. So now I should have a third data set in my data drawer. I have raw data. I cleaned that data, and now I've interpolated it to a common grid. This is what it looks like. Okay, so now, yep, it's coloring it. So there's green and yellow colors in there. So it's using a color ramp, and it is coloring it by NDVI because we interpolated it on NDVI. So let me increase the size of our data points. Okay, so now we're really starting to see, I've got some darker green areas, I've got some yellow areas. So, and it's a ramp from NDVI value of around 0.4 to about 0.6. So I'm getting a range in there. We saw that it was a bell-shaped curve before. So I'm starting to get a pretty decent map. There's different things you can do to visualize this. I did what we call a Jenks break in the data so that it's giving different colors to different breaks within that data. So you can do linear, equal interval, Jenks, or categorical, like if you had gone out and collected small, medium, and large as your the data that you were collecting, you could break the colors up into those categories. But in this case, we used Jenks. So I just gave it a reload there. Okay. Data is broken up into Jenks into 5 zones. You can change this to 3 zones. You can change it to however many zones or what makes sense to you. Of course, you're the vineyard manager and you know these vineyards. And so you will have a better idea of how you want to break them up. You can break them up into up to 10 zones. There's some preset things in here on color ramping. So whatever, you can play with this all you want to, visualize the spatial data in the way that you want. And at this point, you may be happy and just want to stop, right? I have a map. It's showing me differences in NDVI across that field. I know that the NDVI signal, which is, so it's reflecting off of the canopy or off of the shoots, is pretty low in this area. It's pretty high in this area. And that relative difference might be good enough for you and you might use it in your management. But what we really want to do is go to the next step and turn this NDVI signal into an actual shoot count or shoot density measurement in the vineyard. So I'm going to go back and use 5 zones. So that looks pretty good to me. Let's make it simple and go 3 zones. Okay. So I have 3 essential management classifications or 3 zones, depending on how you want to use the terminology, right? Low, medium, and high NDVI signal coming across from this field. Okay, now that we have an interpolated NDVI data set, we want to translate that data set into a shoot density map. So how do we do that? We have to actually go to the field and we need to count shoots on individual vines. So we want to select so many vines in the red, so many in the yellow, and so many in the blue, and count shoots on those vines there, collect that data, and use that data to translate this map into a spatial shoot density map. So the easiest way to do that really is just to set up a data collector. So you go to this little button in the bottom that looks like a clipboard. You would hit new data collector, and you would do shoot counts, right? And I would add a field, and the field would be shoot counts. And I want it to be a number. So I'm guessing in my field, I'm either going to have a vine that has 0 shoots or maybe up to 300 shoots, although I know I didn't prune them that way. Just gives me a nice range. And we're going to step it by 1, and it's a required field and add a field. And so now I have a data collector called shoot counts. And what I do is on my smartphone, I walk to the field, I open up MyEV, and I pull up this interpolated NDVI map. So the easiest thing to do is just walk into the blue area and pick some vines and collect shoot counts. And maybe I'll do it here, and maybe I'll do it here, somewhere like in the meat of the blue areas. I'm going to count shoots, and then the same thing for the yellow and same thing for the red. And it's really up to you about the number of vines that you want to count. You could do 3 vines per zone. You could do 5 vines per zone. You could do 20 vines per zone. The more data you put into it, the better the results you're going to have. But again, you have to balance that out with the amount of work that you're doing. The other thing you can do is you can have MyEV tell you where the locations are going to be by doing what we call a stratified random sampling, meaning we're going to stratify samples across the 3 zones, but within a zone, it's going to be random, and the computer can generate those for you. And I'll show you how to do that. So we go to our tools. We want to do a grid generator. Select our barn block. We're going to use the interpolated NDVI data file, which is the map we were just looking at. We want to stratify these. So you have non-stratified or stratified samples. So stratified means it's going to select points going across the different colored zones. And within a zone, we want the points to be random. Yes, we want to try to avoid edges. And we're going to say, we're going to go 3 points per zone. So 3 in the red, 3 in the yellow, 3 in the blue. We hit generate grid, and there are your points. And I look at them and kind of say, do I like where those points line up within the different colors? And if I don't like it, I just hit generate grid again, and it'll give me another set of points. And if I don't like that, I can hit it again and generate more points. And again, they're all doing the same thing. We are giving 3 dots in the red zone, 3 in the yellow, and 3 in the blue. And we're going to use that to translate this map. So when I'm happy with that and say I am, then we're going to hit apply to my EV. We go back to our data sets drawer, and it should be there. And it is. So we have our raw, we have our clean, we have interpolated, and we have a grid. Oh, and this is the shoot counts data collector that we just made a second ago. So the other way to do this is we take this grid file that we had the computer generate. Let's rename that. So shoot counts generated by computer. We want to make that also a dynamic data set. All a dynamic data set means is that those are data points that you can add data to, say, while you're out in the field. So I hit yes, make that a dynamic data set. Go back to my drawers. Okay, So again, I have my raw, I have my cleaned, I have my interpolated. Now I have two ways to collect shoot counts. I can either, again, walk out into the field with my smartphone, collect those shoot counts just by saying, oh, I'm in the blue, I'm in the yellow, I'm in the red areas, or have the shoot counts on the points that were generated by the computer. And if you go to your data collectors now, we've got two data collectors. So one was the shoot counts that we made ourselves. One is shoot counts on the points that were generated by the computer. We want to edit this to make sure that we are collecting what we want to collect. So again, it's going to be shoot counts. Go from 0 to 300. Step it by 1. It's a required field. Hit update and hit save. So now I have two data collectors. One I made, one the computer made, and we're going to collect those shoot counts. So using either one, go out to the field, collect the data, and we're going to use it. And I will come back after we're done collecting the data and show you how to do it. Okay, so we have our validation points generated by the computer. I took that dynamic data set, I went out to the field with my cell phone, and I actually counted shoots and recorded the data. And then as soon as I enter that data, it gets uploaded to my MyEV account. And then this gets treated just like any other data set that we have. We can color it. So we can do a value based on shoot count. And now we can already see that we have based on colors, anywhere from 60 to 123 shoots per vine. And they're color coded. And again, just like everything else, you can trim it, you can color it different ways that you want. But what we really want to do is take this data set and use it to translate my NDVI map. And the way we do that, we go to our plugins drawer again. So our little magical plugins drawer, and we want to translate the data. So we select the translator plugin. So again, we're not super creative with the way we name things. So we want to translate. What do we want to translate? We want to translate the interpolated May NDVI data file, that's what we based our points on. I want my shoot counts generated by the computer. If I had done it the other way, I would have used the other data file. And it looks at the relationship between NDVI that was collected by the sensor data file and then the actual shoot counts. So we have this, in this case, we get a nice relationship between shoot count and NDVI, so we can run the translation. So we hit the run translation button and it works. And you want to add that to MyEV. So you're going to add it to your data drawer, just like all the other data layers that we have. Okay, going back to the beginning, we have raw, we cleaned it, we interpolated it, we generated validation counts 2 different ways. We used the one generated by the computer, collected those shoot counts, we used it to translate the NDVI map. And now we have a finished map that we can do value based. Let's do some Jenks breaks. So here is our finished spatial shoot count map. So we know in the red zone, we have a maximum of 50 shoots. The orange zone is 49 to 82. The yellow zone is 82 to 110 or 111. The green is 111 to 151. And the blue is above 151 shoots per vine. So again, now I can we've generated the shoot count map, and now you can use that for your management. If you want to do, say later in the season, you want to do crop estimation, you can use this map to direct your crop estimation samples. If you really feel like the red and orange zones are weak vines that need some other kind of management, you can use this to direct it, whether that's variable rate fertilizer applications, or variable rate floor management to conserve soil moisture for those vines, whatever it is in your management program that would help, say, increase the vine size, shoot count, and productivity of those vines, versus maybe the other side that they're very big vines with a lot of shoots and maybe they have too much crop, and you would be looking at reduced fruit quality at the end of the season. Again, having this one piece of spatial information allows you to be able to go out and assess what is going on in the vineyard and tailor your management decisions on a sub-block level. So, okay, I hope this tutorial helped you. Again, and I've recapped it a bunch already. So you start off by having just a single block. You add raw data to that. You clean that raw data in terms of just getting rid of junk data. You know, just want the data that is going to mean something to you. You interpolate that, which is essentially smoothing that data, trying to draw out what the pattern is in the vineyard by interpolating that spatial data to a common grid. Then we want to translate the data, and to do that, we have to generate validation points in the vineyard. And again, the number of validation points that you use and how you stratify those validation points is really meant to get the data you need, but also reduce the amount of labor that is required to collect that data in the field. So you're not just going out, say, doing a blanket grid sampling of that vineyard. We're trying to direct things so you can get the most out of your data, and then you translate that data into some viticulture information that you can use in your management. So that is a quick tutorial on how to do that, and we're going to be going out to our cooperating grower vineyards, and we are going to run through this process with the growers. And again, if you can use it for shoot validation, you can use it for many other things that are in your vineyard, and you should try to start identifying what those potential uses are in your vineyard. So thanks for listening, and good luck. If you have any questions, you can email me, trb7@Cornell, or you hit the little bullhorn down here and you can add your message, and that will go to Nick Gunner and then to myself. And if you find bugs in the program or things that aren't working for you, or you get stuck and you need a little help, just put something in that text box and we will get back to you and try to help you through the process. So thanks again, and good luck.